Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome to episode 33 of Mid-Century Living, this show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add the vintage vibes to your modern life. We are your hosts, Gonzalo.
And Jackie, thank you for joining us today. So today we're talking about 1960s fashion, but first, Gonzalo, how was your week?
So, a couple of weeks ago in our episode, I talked about how I was stressing over the purchasing of a camera, and I did end up buying the camera. And every time I went on the website and I was like, check out, because I had to go a couple of times before I actually hit purchase, but it always said that it was going to be delivered on Saturday, May the 4th, which, by the way, is today, and also happy Star Wars Day.
Happy Star Wars Day.
Yeah. But UPS keeps saying it's going to be delivered on Monday instead. But it's, according to the tracking thingy, it's in the delivery place in the city where I live. So I'm like, just put it on the truck. I want my camera.
I know when it's like something important and it's hanging out in your city, I almost want to call them and be like, can I just come get it? Because
I know.
I can probably do that faster.
It's like, get your act together, UPS. I know that you know logistics better than I do, but I'm pretty sure I know better in this situation.
Yeah, UPS, I feel like also more often than not will mark something delivered and then you don't actually get it till the next day.
See, I'm hoping it's the other way around. I'm hoping that they're like saying it's not going to be delivered until Monday, and then while we're recording, I'll get a knock on my door and my camera will be there and I'll be happy.
Yeah, I like that better. I hope that happens.
Yeah. But anyway, that was my week.
Oh, well, I'm glad you finally made a decision and you bought one. Did you end up trading in the other one and getting the $50, or are you just keeping it?
No, I ended up keeping it. I don't know why, apart from the fact that I didn't feel like driving an hour to the camera shop.
That is fair. That is a very good reason. Yeah, good. Fair enough.
But this way, if I ever want an old camera that is less quality than the new one, but looks fancy, I can always use it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my week. What was yours like?
Mine was fine. I do think I finally broke my sewing writer's block. Sewist's block?
Sure, sewist block.
Sewist block. I did end up finishing that bolero I said I was going to make for Star Wars Day. I cut it out last weekend, but I actually didn't even put it together until last night, and I was like, oh yeah, this will take an hour. It took 2.5 hours, so I don't know if that's because I'm rusty or because it's just been a while since I've sewn anything and I forgot like how long it takes, but despite it taking more than twice as long as I thought it was going to take, it was genuinely satisfying to do, and I liked working to a deadline. So I think really my problem is like maybe accountability, like something about saying it on the podcast meant I had to do it. And then also like having some event to make something for really was helpful and motivating. So like knowing that I wanted to make this specifically for Star Wars Day gave me that extra boost. And now I'm thinking of like, instead of thinking of projects and then events afterwards, I'm thinking of events and then projects. And I think that's going to help a lot.
There you go.
So I have another dress idea that I can make with fabric that's been sitting in my fabric stash for a couple years. And I think I finally figured out the perfect dress for it. And I have somewhere to wear it too at the end of the month. So I think that combination of things will help keep me motivated. So I think I've broken the curse. So that's not super interesting radio, probably, but an excellent segue into today's topic, because today we are actually talking about 1960s fashion.
Okay, but before we get into it, Jackie, listeners, if you haven't listened to our episode on 1950s fashion, maybe you want to take a listen to that first. And that is episode 2, 1950s fashion, which we will link in our show notes.
Thank you. Thanks for that plug. So now on to today's topic. So Gonzalo, what do you think about when you hear 1960s fashion?
Okay, so I have this very specific image in my mind, and it is, okay, go with me on this. It is Shaggy's love interest in the movie Scooby-Doo and the Alien Invaders. which if you've never seen, it's totally okay because that's a very niche thing in my mind. But the main character love interest there was she wore bell-bottom jeans and like a tie-dye shirt, and she had like the I can only call them like John Lennon glasses, and then a headband around her head. But it wasn't like, it was like a, not like a headband. It was like a, like, you know, like you can fold a bandana into like a inch or 2 inch like strap thingy, and then like tie it around the back. That's what it looked like. Also, it's a cartoon, so who knows?
That is interesting and a fairly accurate.
Very Woodstock.
That is a fairly accurate description about part of the 60s, but the 60s.
What was the rest like?
But the rest was different, and I actually did. That kind of reminds me of somebody I read someone somewhere saying that what most people picture as the style of a decade usually ends up being the last couple of years of that decade.
Okay, I can see that.
Which that tracks with what you just said, but that's some food for thought for everybody as we go on with the rest of the topic. But basically, there were three main fashion trends in fashion in the 1960s. So there was 1950s leftovers at the beginning of the decade. So the early times was like the earlier transition period. Then there's the fun, youthful designs popularized by swinging London in the middle of the decade. And then we get to hippie style, which is what you just talked about, which is more Eastern influence in the late 60s.
Okay.
Another major thing that happened in the 60s with fashion is that we saw a shift from designer-centric fashion to one where the consumer was the center of creation. And I'll get to more on that later, but both the mod movement and the hippie movement created a new concept of street style, where fashion is starting in the streets and then moving up to designers instead of the other way around.
Interesting.
So I'm going to go through each of those fashion trends and how that looked for both menswear and womenswear. So let's start with the 1950s leftovers. Women's wear. So in the early years of the decade, fashion continued along the lines of 1950s for both men and women. For women, it was below the knee skirts and matching accessories were still the norm. Jackie Kennedy epitomized this look. She was admired around the world for her put-together, ladylike look, consisting of skirt suits, sheath and A-line dresses, and luxurious coats, all accessorized with white gloves, pearls, and a matching hat. She was actually the last celebrity woman to wear hats as a necessary fashion accessory, usually a pillbox hat.
Interesting. Because I never picture of her without the like very well put together. Yes.
Exactly. And as we know, after the assassination in 1963, she wasn't really in the spotlight as much anymore, so it makes sense that people would be looking for different fashion icons. But really, the full skirt and tight bodice of the 1950s swing dress continued in the early 60s with the slightly above or at the knee hemline, and modest high neckline still. 1960s dress colors and patterns were brighter, bigger, and streamlined with simple necklines and shorter cap sleeves. The full skirted look actually didn't leave fashion in the 60s at all. It carried through to the 1970s. It just kind of got less fluffy. So if you remember in the 1950s episode, Dior loved huge, giant, many yards of fabric skirts. And if you look at pictures of dresses, even just like flared dresses like that in the 60s, it looks like they're using half the yardage in the skirt. Like they are a lot less poofy. And they usually end at the knee. So another style of 1960s dresses that was really popular was the contoured sheath dress. So, and pencil dresses were still around in the 1950s, but they were tailored at the time to like tailored tight to the hourglass curve of the body. But in the early 60s, the sheath dress started losing its tight curves and kind of relaxing into a shift dress. And the shift dress basically lacked any tailored waistline. It pinched in a little bit around the ribs, but it just kind of skimmed over the hips and had a lot more wearing ease. And it was loose but narrow, and it was comfortable and easy to wear, and usually ended around just above the knee. And it was the primary women's dress style of the 1960s. So for menswear, the mid to late 50s saw a rise in Italian-style suits with narrow ties, but in the 60s, menswear gradually incorporated brighter colors and patterns, and ties began to widen again as the decade progressed.
Yes, which I'm not a fan of white ties. I like narrow ties, which I understand that is more in keeping with the contemporary style, not 1960s, but like, yeah.
Yeah, well, I tried to embellish more on the menswear section this time because I felt bad for the puny little section I gave it in the 1950s episode, but honestly, the difference in menswear is so subtle, like between different styles of suits. Yeah, it's just like all of the variations are so subtle, and I'm sure to men, when that's all you have for fashion options, like half an inch in your tie thickness is like a really big deal and like a statement piece. And then like
Well, it is because like to like our age group, a wider tie is like,
mhm.
oh, what are you, your dad? Like our parents used white ties. We don't use white. Like I've got like one 3-inch tie that I have never used since high school, and the only reason why I have it is because my first tie in high school was one of my dad's old
Yeah,
ties.
I think ties are way easier to track to a time period. And those narrow ties that they look very retro, and then they came back again in a certain time where everyone was wearing narrow ties again in like the early aughts. I have no idea what
Hmm.
ties are doing now, but I haven't been to a formal event in a while.
I put on a tie yesterday and or Thursday, and it was a inch and a half.
So is that what kids are wearing these days, or just your favorite tie?
It's what our age group is wearing these days because I wore it to a wedding in December.
Fair enough. Well, the tie tangent is relevant because starting in 1950s leftovers for menswear, we're going to start with suits. So in the 1950s, business suits all looked mostly the same. It was grays and browns with the loose fit single pleat leg.
Hmm.
But in the early 60s, suits were modernized a bit with a lower waistband, flat front trousers, narrowing lapels, two instead of three button jackets, and eventually they dropped down to just one button.
Mm.
Suit jackets also began being worn over non matching trousers, but keeping the jacket and the trousers in the same color family kept the look conservative enough for the office. These updated suits were often worn without a hat and were called the JFK look, which is cute because all the women were wearing what Jackie was wearing and the men were copying JFK's looks. So this is the first 3 years of the 60s. And across the pond, a three-button suit jacket with a high neck was dubbed the Britisher style.
So
Um,
I don't like single button jackets. I like 2-button jackets, and everybody knows. I'm assuming everyone knows the rules with the buttons.
that you have to unbutton it to sit down.
Not necessarily just that, but yes. So a 3-button suit jacket, you only ever button the middle button. A 2-button jacket, you only button the top, and a 1-button jacket, you wouldn't wear because it's a 1-button jacket.
But you have to unbutton it every time you sit and then button it again when you stand up, right?
Correct.
Fascinating.
There's some etiquette for you.
Well, anyway, at the end of the 50s, menswear already began moving toward a more casual style, but it became even more casual and colorful in the 1960s. So, casual wear in the early 60s, outside of the office, the latest trend was sports coats in bold patterns and contrasting colors. This look was heavily influenced by the Ivy League style, which wore mismatched suit jackets and pants with a bold colored suit vest or sweater vest. Red and yellow were the most popular vest colors that popped under dark blue, gray, or tan sports coats. Dark vests were worn with lighter colored jackets. Brightly colored dress shirts replaced vests in the mid to late 1960s. And then some other variations on men's casual wear that's worth mentioning are casual polo shirts with solid or patterned trousers on the weekends, worn with a belt. Tennis sweaters, cardigans, and sweater vests instead of sport coats, and athletic sweatshirts, t-shirts, and cabana sets at home or on vacation. I really like Don Draper's casual looks, which he doesn't wear very often, but he had like there's a couple cuz they're in the office most of the time so everyone's wearing suits. But when you see Don in a casual setting, he had like two looks. He had plaid sport coat look one, which is like this like red plaid that he only wore like twice, and then his more often than not like weekend look was what people keep calling the Lee Harvey Oswald, but he can't be the only person who wore this outfit. But it's like pants, like khaki pants, and a button-down white shirt with a long sleeve sweater over it, and then he rolled the sleeves up with the shirt. So it's like up near the elbow, but you see like the shirt collar and like cuffs are like all tied up at his, like all rolled up on his elbows. But apparently he wore, I mean, it must have been a very popular outfit in 1963. So anyway, that was 1950s leftovers transitioning into the 60s. Not totally crazy compared to the 1950s style, but you can see everything's changing a little bit. And then we get to the swinging London mod phase, which I think actually might be my favorite look of the 1960s. So the cultural phenomenon termed swinging London began in 1955 but reached its peak in the early to mid 60s. It focused on youth, spotlighting music and fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So for menswear especially, movie stars had been the primary style icons in the 1930s, but in the 1960s, rock stars became a primary influence on fashion. For men, it was the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, and Mick Jagger, who were the main fashion icons. So for women's wear, the designer who led the way in this youthquake was Mary Quant. She is credited with inventing the miniskirt, and her whole idea was to move away from the grown-up fashion of the 1950s. So her dresses were very short, and her prints were bold and colorful mod prints. She also created this trend of like baby doll dresses and jumper-style dresses. The jumper-style dresses were like sleeveless mini dresses layered over tops with really big bows and large collars, basically making women look like little girls' dolls. Again, trying to get as far away from the mature 50s fashion as possible. Her fashion and her personality set the tone for the rest of the 60s, and that tone was fashion is fun. In addition to music being an influence, designers were also inspired by pop art and space. There's also a focus on using newly developed materials such as acrylics, polyesters, and shiny PVC. Later in the decade, psychedelic prints introduced a trippy edge to clothing, so that's when we get the large paisley swirls, neon flower daisies, and like tropical beach prints. Bright yellows, orange, hot pink, and lime green were the favorite colors. And these bold colors and loud patterns were seen on dresses, skirts, tops, and pants.
This is where we get the Austin Powers aesthetics.
Yeah. Yeah, the Austin Powers aesthetics. But when I close my eyes and think of 60s fashion, this is what I think of, like mini dresses, paisleys, neon, go-go boots. So for men, the mod look was also very popular. It was kind of like part throwback to the Edwardian age and part futuristic. So mod men's clothing actually ranged from conservative yet trendy to flashy. This look dominated mostly in the UK and was less mainstream in the US, but fashion-forward young men who were the primary audience for this look, and they were kind of buying mod clothing thinking it would attract other women who were obsessed with British rock bands. So mod clothing was made cheaply and lasted usually only for a season, and you replace it when new styles came in. So for the first time, men have joined the fast fashion race. So 60s men's mod looks mixed skinny rib body shirts, turtlenecks, and mod print sweaters in vibrant colors, dress shirts in bold stripes or big prints with white collars, skin-tight low-waist denim, suede, or poly knit pants with a small flare to fit over boots, fitted blazers in rich fabrics like velvet, silk, or damask, stripes, tweed, and herringbone, skinny ties or silk neckerchiefs in bright solid colors. Boots, especially Chelsea boots and half-ankle booties, were the big new shoe style for mod men in the 1960s.
Oh no.
Are you Googling it? Or is that just your reaction to ankle booties?
I just imagine myself walking into school wearing this outfit, and it does not end well for my psyche.
I mean, it is the look. I think you kind of nailed it with the Austin Powers aesthetic. But anyway, so mod fashion, skirts are super, super short, and the mini skirt really reached its height in mid-decade, and then we get to the hippies, which is basically trying to reject the fast fashion race that the mods were so into. So society started like swinging away from that, or at least a certain group of people did. So a new style and culture was emerging as we moved toward the hippie aesthetic. So in 1968-69, fashion started shifting to earth tones, faded denim jeans, embroidered tops and tunics, and handmade accessories. For the flowered child decoration of patches, embroidery, painting, and peace signs were added by many hippies to make their jeans feel less commercial or to make an anti-war statement. Some more specific qualities of hippie fashion in women were crocheted pieces, suede vests, sandals, shift dresses or flared jeans with an embroidered trim, full-length maxi skirts, secondhand clothing, and influence from non-Western elements like headbands, caftans, Afghan coats, and beads. And it is worth mentioning that real hippies and hippie fashion were two totally different things. So, like, real hippies were mostly activists trying to, like, go against fast fashion as a political statement. And then some others just borrowed from the aesthetic because it looked comfortable and pretty, I guess. 60s hippie fashion eventually influenced mainstream designers who turned back to the down to earth. Hippie fashion was a blend of current silhouettes and folk art decoration. So hippie men rejected the fast fashion as well and started shopping at thrift stores instead. They purchased anything ethnic, well-worn, or gender-bending. They learned to make bead necklaces and headbands, tie-dye shirts, and tulle leather, which is really cool. Used clothes were upcycled with patches, embroidery, and beading. In the early years of hippie fashion, they also borrowed some of the psychedelic clothing and prints that had entered the mainstream around the end of the mod era. So vivid swirls of color on shirts and pants, mixed with fringe vests and boots. Hippies also kind of created historically inspired throwback fashions because they were shopping at thrift stores. They mixed things like heavily decorated velvet jackets, white ruffled dickies, heavy gold chain necklaces, and psychedelic flares. And then by the end of the decade, just like with women, hippie men were adopting clothing or elements traditionally worn by other cultures. Basically, they were trying to go for the exact opposite of tailored Western fashion. So, African dashikis, Indian batik tunics, Native American jewelry, and moccasin boots were popular at this time.
I'm just trying to picture myself wearing this, and I cannot. But I also have I have what has been described to me as a frat boy aesthetic.
I mean, that is an aesthetic and a very achievable one. So some closing thoughts on it was I read in one of my Facebook groups someone say that the 1960s was the biggest change from the beginning of a decade to the end of a decade in fashion. And when you think about it, I mean, if you just look at someone from 1961 standing next to a hippie from 1969 and then try to compare that transition in any other decade, it is remarkable how much. And then that's even, if
Yeah,
you're just
I can
looking at
see
those
that.
two, you're totally missing even the in-between chaos of the mod movement as well. Like, the 60s were wild for fashion, and there's a lot to pull from it. It is very, very interesting. I don't know, what do you think?
I agree with that statement. As how while you were saying that, in my mind I was trying to think of other decades and how the beginning and the ends look like in fashion, and I couldn't think of anything compare different decades. And I'm seeing it in my mind. I'm like, I know this is wrong, but I'm like, what did I wear in high school versus what the kids wear in high school? I see a change there, but I don't really see a change in like the early thousands to like 2010.
Yeah, other than a couple brands that came and went, yeah, I don't think there's quite as dramatic a shift in any other decade as there was in the 60s. And that's what makes it so interesting and kind of brings us to our connection to today, because I really think that the 60s are having a moment right now. So, Palm Royale came out. It's a new show which I haven't seen, but it has inspired a lot of clothing collections, and like Anthropologie has a whole like line about it, which is pretty cool. Target just released a Diane von Furstenberg collection, and it was gorgeous. And so there's actually a lot of places where you can buy 1960s inspired clothing right now.
So the 1960s are definitely back. I mean, you can buy Tupperware at
Are
Target.
they for men as well? Yeah, you can get Tupperware at Target. But if anyone doesn't really want 60s inspired and you want something a little bit more period accurate, here are my top recommendations for repro clothing. So step one should always be going to vintagedancer.com. She is the ultimate vintage fashion resource. Most of the information for this episode actually came from her fashion history articles, but she also constantly curates pages of shoppable links. So I would definitely start here because you can shop a whole lot of different brands and all in one place. And she has just as much stuff for men as she does women, and it's just like aggregated from across the internet. I don't know how she compiles these lists. She must be constantly shopping. But You can get very specific on there too, like just 1960s men's pants or 1960s women's tops. Like you can get, and it's just pages of stuff. So everyone should start there. Um, if anything, just to see kind of what the marketplace looks like right now. Um, Another good resource for 60s specific clothing would be Unique Vintage, who I also recommended in the 50s episode. They let you shop by decade. In their websites, a lot of house brands and some other brands, and they have a ton of inventory and really great sales. But their quality is a little hit and miss, so make sure that you read reviews and read the fabric content and check all the size charts before ordering from them. And unfortunately, this website's just women's wear only. If you are in the UK or in Europe in general, Collective Clothing is one of my favorite repro brands. They have a US store as well. They're mostly 50s, but there is some 60s sprinkled in. You can't shop by decade like you can on the other sites, but if you took my advice and started at Vintage Dancer and work your way over, you'll be able to recognize 60s inspired clothes when you see them. So, like, you could do things like type in mini in the search bar and just see all their mini dresses, and then you find the ones with collars and you're like, okay, that looks mod, I'll buy that. And they do have a little bit of menswear, mainly casual 60s inspired men's sweaters, which is actually really cool. So and they have some shoes and everything too, and they have really great sales. So for shoes, I highly recommend Bait Footwear. You can shop by decade on their website as well, and their shoes are super comfortable, and they are basically the only shoe brand that I wear. But I don't. They only have women's shoes, and I'm actually not sure of a one-stop shop as good as this for men's shoes. So listeners, if you have any leads, please send them my way. But Vintage Dancer does have a shoppable page for men's 1960s shoes, so that should give everyone a good starting point. If you sew, Gertie, who is quite famous on the internet for making her own sewing patterns, she has a few 1960s sewing patterns available either on her Patreon or for purchase on the Charm Patterns website. And she has two patterns that were directly inspired by dresses worn by characters on Mad Men, and they are called the Joan dress and the Betty dress. And so she's super fun. I love her patterns. And then, of course, you could also always try your hand at sourcing true vintage. Etsy and eBay are good online resources, or you can check out local antique malls and flea markets if you don't have the patience for thrifting. I know the best deals can be had thrifting, but then you have to like dig through all the racks, and I just don't. I don't have that kind of time. There are also a lot of vintage resellers on Instagram, but their inventory moves really fast. So if you find something you like, you gotta snatch it up. But anyway, now that we're caught up to the present, it is time for our etiquette segment. So, Gonzalo, what do we have today?
All right. So today's etiquette segment comes to you once again from Amy Vanderbilt's Complete Book of Etiquette from 1957. And because we record on Saturdays, our shows go out on Fridays, and a lot of people like to eat out on the weekends. And also because it's prom season, and those dances usually involve going out to eat at a restaurant. Oh yeah, and we have such a big teenage following. Today's etiquette comes from chapter 57, titled Dining in Restaurants. And there's a section, okay, so the section I want to talk about is on the arriving and the seating at the restaurant.
Okay.
A man entering a restaurant removes his hat and checks it along with his coat, packages, and umbrellas. If there's a head waiter, or I guess we call these the host and hostesses now, the man would step back and let his date walk ahead to be seated. If there's no host, then the man goes first, pulls out a chair, and seats the woman, preferably to his right.
That's an interesting detail.
Yeah. The choice of a lady's seat, whether from a host or from the man, should be to look out into the restaurant or be by a window with a view. She should never be sat where passing traffic may strike her chair, and she should not be facing the rear wall or a swinging door. If there's a booth with only one wall seat, then the lady takes that and the man takes the chair or the aisle seat.
All right.
Side note, I've definitely broken that rule before.
Yeah, everyone does, because those are the better seats.
Well, it's not that. I remember I have a specific moment that it happened in mind, and I remember getting to the table and thinking, shit, which one am I supposed to take? Do I take the booth? Do I take the chair? Which one's the etiquette one? And then my date was like, I guess I'll just sit here. And I go, okay. and I sat, and then after the whole entire dinner, I was like, "This is the wrong one. This is the wrong one. How do I get up now? We can't switch seats. We've already seated." And like the entree came in, and I couldn't focus on the conversation because all I was thinking of was I'm sitting in the wrong chair.
That's funny.
Anyway, if a younger couple is sitting with an older couple, then the older couple is offered the wall seats, and the younger couple sits together on the aisle, so that the younger man is opposite of the older woman.
All right.
If two younger couples sit together, then the ladies take chairs opposite each other. And Amy says, quote, "There's no great point, however, need to be made over the seating," end quote. So basically, like, these are the rules. If you break them, it's okay.
That's good to know. So you didn't have to spend your whole dinner worrying about it.
See, maybe, because I'm also taking this quote as that is how I interpret it. Whether that's how she meant it or not, I don't know. I'm just trying to absolve my guilt.
She might also mean, like, if you're in a group setting, you don't need to stand there and argue about who's sitting where. Or no great point to be made might mean, like, don't make a big show about.
Oh, like I'm taking the seat because I'm supposed to.
Or, yeah, something like that.
I get it. Regarding ordering at a restaurant, if the dinner or luncheon is previously arranged, the order is often given in advance by the host or hostess, and no menu is handed to the guests on arrival. Guests accept what is put before them, quote, even if they don't care for the host's choice in some dish or other. They make at least a pretense of eating it.
Yep.
When two people are lunching or dining together, one will take the initiative and does the ordering after a little consultation, regardless of whether or not they are the host or hostess. If the group is awkwardly large, then the waiter will take the order from each one, separate.
Yep. That's still true.
Yep. Here's where, in my opinion, it starts to not be applicable. But where a woman is accompanied by a man, it is assumed the man is the host and is, quote, expected to do the ordering after the woman has had a few minutes to look over the menu. After the man says something like, "What do you think you'd like to have?" End quote. Which gives me big time Titanic vibes with, "Hey, we'll both have the lamb, rare with very little mint sauce." And then
Yep.
he turns and he's like, "You like lamb, right?" Like, that's what it gives me.
Yeah, that's sort of the vibe.
Yeah. Amy says that the woman will choose, preferably, the meal in which everything is included in the price of the entree, and says what her first course will be. If ordering a la carte, she names only the entree, the main course, and lets her host suggest a first course to her, quote, as he should. Yes, indeed.
Well, I don't know. Let's get to the end and then I'll comment.
If the lady, out of respect for her host's pocketbook, does not order a first course, the man should not order one for himself either. He can, however, ask something like, "Are you sure you don't want anything? I'm going to have the blank." At which point she can say something like, "I believe I will have something after all," and then quickly choose something. When asked directly by the waiter, a lady does not order directly to the waiter. Instead, tells her host what she wishes to eat so that he can order. She may, of course, ask the waiter for specifics on what she wants, and if the answers are satisfactory, then she tells her host so that he can order.
So that's bananas. So if it's 3 people, 2 people at a table, and a waiter standing right next to them, he's supposed to ask her what she wants, and she's supposed to turn and look at her date and tell him, who then turns to look at the waiter and then says she'll have the chicken.
Yeah, and which is crazy. Apart from the waste of time, it's also like why does he have to approve what you want? Like, if you want the chicken, tell the waiter.
Well, that's the thing is, like, you're going into it with the Titanic in mind,
Yes.
and he was a jerk on purpose, and so he's like, to be in character, he had to do all of the, like, can we say douchey?
Yeah, that's fine. You can say douchey.
So, he had to be like the douchiest version of the man in this situation, but like if you do this properly and your date is not a jerk, you both discuss the menu, like, oh yeah, this sounds great, and you totally know what you want, and then when the waiter comes over and says, "Are you ready to order?" the man just says, "The lady will have the chicken, I'm gonna have the steak, and we're both gonna split the fried pickles." And the man just, like, gives the order to the waiter. It just kind of sounds like old-timey, which I guess is interpreted as sexist now, that all of the business of the ordering, all of the business transactions between the waiter and the table go through the man, which is that didn't age very well.
Yeah.
But if they have the full discussion and they're totally settled on the menu together and the woman's getting what she wants, it's not crazy for one person to give both orders. I just think nowadays people don't do that. Like everyone just talks to the waiter.
Yeah. See,
regardless of gender.
I took it to be more like, to me, it sounds like she's not talking to the waiter because she's like turning to the man and being like, this is what I want. It's okay. And that I don't agree with. Like, it's no business of the man to say.
It just kind of sounds like all of this big dance is like everyone's going out of their way to have the woman not talk to the waiter even when he's right next to her. And I think that this is like, we finally got to the point where the etiquette pretenses are silly.
Yes.
Because I can't think of any reason at all other than that it's not socially acceptable for the woman to just turn to the waiter who's standing a foot to her right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, they're both, like, we should be all, but
should be adults.
The fancy thing to do is to have the host of the table do all of the communication with the waiter. That can happen without the man choosing the woman's order. Right. So maybe that's what it is that you're hearing host and like she's saying host and we're hearing like boss.
Yes.
But really what she means is who's paying.
Yes.
The person who's paying, I guess, has final say over but that's sort of like why she has that weird bit where if they sit down at the restaurant and she's like, oh my God, everything here is really expensive, and says she doesn't want anything because she's nervous it's too expensive. And that's why she gives the man the opportunity to say, like, are you sure you don't want anything? I'm going to have the blank. Yeah. And then she's like, oh, okay. So there's a lot of layers here. But anyway, I hate it. I guess that's what you're about to ask. Some of this, I think we still do, but some of this etiquette people still do. So I'm okay that we've evolved out of a lot of this etiquette, is I guess what I'm saying. So I disagree with more of this than I agree with. So if that's, then I can unstamp her.
Okay, so then we will not stamp this as approved by us.
No, we do not approve of the pretentious dinner etiquette.
Noted. Well, with that, it feels like we have landed the plane. Thank you all for listening today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. This is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions, so send us a DM anytime.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you again next week.
Bye!
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.